Okay, so welcome to today's virtual training session, and a special thank you to our presenter, Cindy Reinhard, for generously sharing her expertise with us. Today's training actually plays a critical role in furthering the mission of the Nonprofit Connection, and that's to build the capacity and capability of our local nonprofits, which many of you are a part of. By participating in this session, you're investing in your personal development and contributing to the impact of your organization. So the knowledge that you acquire today can potentially enhance your capability and capacity and foster a stronger, more impactful nonprofit sector. I also want to mention as we dive into this training, please keep in mind that we hope that you will stay engaged and be committed to this. And if you have any questions throughout, please feel free to either put them in the chat, or Cindy, if you feel comfortable, people just popping on, we're okay with that too. So thank you so much for being part of this initiative, and I hope that you find value and insight through this experience. Now I'll go ahead and turn it over to Cindy.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Abby. And thanks to everyone who showed up this wonderful snowy morning. I don't know how many of you are, but I'm a huge snow and winter person. So like the weather today is like an absolute mood changer for me in the best possible way. So, but I know it's also challenging still if you have kids or people at home that you're trying to take care of. And so hopefully everything's working out for you today. I was really excited when Abby asked me to do this. I've had the opportunity to work alongside Abby in some capacity for probably 5 or 6 years. Is that right? But she knows me, and communication really is a high value of mine. So I'm excited to be with you this morning, and hopefully, although I would bet that most of what I'm going to share today probably isn't new, hopefully it's a refresher or just brings things back on your radar that you're able to say, oh yeah, that's really important. Oh, I've forgotten about that. Or just kind of helps you wherever you're at in your particular job to sort of reorient yourself to figure out how might I be able to utilize this in a way that my organization can actually succeed. So my name is Cindy Reinhard. Like Abby said, I am the organizational consultant at Weber State University. I also do some search advocacy work for our human resources department, but a lot of my job is going into various departments on campus and helping teams function well, or working with supervisors to get them the training and the support and the resources they need to be able to lead their departments across campus in a really excellent, successful way. And so that's one of the things I get to do. I'm born and raised Montanan. I was actually telling Abby, we had our offices redone where I'm at. And so I went and got artwork, and I bought this cow picture and then hung it up. And then in my first meeting realized that I literally bought a cow that looked just like me. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh, it's my twin. So I affectionately refer to her as Bessie. And hopefully you also enjoy her throughout the morning. But I was cracking up because I was like, it's my coloring and my glasses. And but I was born and raised in Montana. I've been in Utah a little over a decade, but I've been doing some form of communication, training, presentation, teaching for over 20 years. Most of my jobs have had that component. Before I worked here at Weber State, I worked for the Attorney General of Utah as his executive communications assistant, did a lot of communications from there. And so when we're talking about communication this morning and the way we're going to talk about it, hopefully you see that it's actually a lot more important than just learning how to have hard conversations. So while I know that's on everyone's mind, like how do I have the hard conversations, which are a valuable thing to know, what I really want to do is for us to take a step back and really look at communication as a whole and how it impacts your organization as a whole. Oh, and these are my people here, my husband, Scott, and my 3 little kids, Emerson and Thorin and Ingrid. But today what we're going to talk about
I don't think you're sharing yet.
Oh,
can
no.
everybody see her? I can't see it.
Let's try this.
No, I don't.
There,
oh, now I do.
There we go. Now you're
Okay.
back on.
Here's my people.
There they are.
There they are. Thanks, Abby. We had tested that and I forgot we had shut it off. But today what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the creation of a culture when you're using communication, the things that we don't say and why they matter, what makes communication go right, how to do the hard thing, and then leading the way. So even if you're not necessarily a top tier leader or someone who has a lot of influence over what your organization is doing in terms of where it's headed, you always have influence over how communication is handled in your office. And so that's what we want to talk about some today. So when it comes to creating a culture of communication, it's important to understand that the context of your organization in your office impacts the ability to have authentic communication, right? And authentic conversations. So communication really is the key to the creation of any organization, the transformation of any organization, and long-term success. It really is a process by which organizations are established and sustained. I know a lot of times we start thinking about ideas like, oh, it all starts with an idea. Maybe, like, an idea is really important because that gets you going, but it's how you talk about that idea. It's how you share that idea. It's how you cast vision for that idea that actually births it into some sort of reality. And that's the same in your organization. How you talk about things, how you cast vision for what you're hoping to accomplish, the way you communicate with your team members, all of those are critical in terms of the long-term success of what you are trying to accomplish through your nonprofit. So when you think about shaping a culture, when you think about changing goals, adjusting a strategic plan, it always starts with communication. So what I'd like you to do is right now in the chat, I just want you to drop in the various ways that you see communication at work in your nonprofit. There's a lot of different ways. They happen all of the time. But I want you to think about, where do you see communication happening in your organization specifically? So maybe mission and vision, that's a form of communication. Email, Zoom chat, meetings in person, definitely. Team meetings, yes. Team building is huge. How you communicate the value of a team. Facebook page, text messages. Respect for others, definitely, Carol. When we think about strategic plans, that's a form of communication. When we think about customer service, and maybe conversing with our constituents, conversing with our clients, that's a form of communication. How you're communicating information to them, things they need to know about, things like trainings, things like events, that's a form of communication. At the water cooler, in the break room, definitely. Team building, psychological safety, employee reviews, those are all forms of communication. And I think a lot of times when we think about communication, we think specifically about correspondence. And what I want you to think about is that most of what you are doing in any given day is a form of communication in some way or another. How you're operating with people, talking with people, those become non-obvious forms of communication. So something like how you lead meetings, for example. What is your meeting communicating? Are you using people's time wisely? Are you setting the stage for what to expect in the conversation? Do you send an agenda ahead of time? Do you have an outline of what you are going to discuss, or is it all just kind of free flowing? None of it's inherently bad or good, but it is a form of communication, and you're communicating culture in things like that. So those are things to be mindful of, that these are all ways that we communicate in any given day. And you set the tone for that. You're the one that's setting the stage for what to expect from your team, from your clientele, and from your customers. Did someone have a question? Oh no, okay, sorry. I thought I heard someone pop up. So those are just things that I want you to be thinking about, that there's so much more to communication than just the email, just the text message, just the phone call. It's being able to communicate things in a way that are actually showing the people around you what you expect and what you are working toward in your organization. Research has actually shown, it's pretty interesting, if you start going through all kinds of information or articles or research studies that have been done, there is a significant difference between organizations where strong communication, including the ability to do the hard conversations, which we will talk about, impact teamwork climate, safety climate, job satisfaction, management perceptions, and working conditions. It's significant. And they've also found that long-term success, financial success for most organizations all starts with a strong communication culture. So yes, Heather, even not showing up is a form of communication. It's a communication of value, whether or not people are worth your time and energy, right? People are paying attention to that. So that all kind of begs the question though, what then is strong communication? So I want you right now to think of someone that you consider as a strong communication. And as you're thinking about them, what skills or characteristics do you notice that they have? And I want you to drop those in the chat. Can I give you just a minute to think? I know sometimes it takes some time. Good listening skills, absolutely. Prompt responses, passionate and energetic, follow through, details. Listening, very clear, yes. Compassionate, yes, yes. Engaged, that's really important. We're going to talk about that in a second. Encouraging, yes. All of those things. I have noticed that partly because of my work, and I did, like Abby, got a master's in professional communication, and most of my job is this, communicating to people, that I pay attention to how people communicate. How are they speaking about an idea? Are they talking coherently, eloquently? Is it clear, like Kirsten said? Those are all things that I'm noticing about strong communicators. And really, when we talk about strong communication, really what we're talking about is the ability to exchange our ideas, our thoughts, and our opinions, even knowledge and data, in a way that the message is received and understood, right? So you can get up in front of people and you can talk a lot, but if people are not able to receive your message, and if they don't understand what it is that you are trying to communicate, you have not done a good job of communicating what that is. So some of these you guys have already mentioned, but the things that I see most is that good communicators are clear. They know exactly what it is they're trying to communicate. They don't walk into situations and begin to, like, at one point and then like talk themselves through something, trying to get to the conclusion. They've already spent the time they need to get to the conclusion they need. So they are communicating clearly to their team members, right? And part of that goes along with that is they communicate completely. They give the full thought, not half thoughts. They don't give half the answer. They give the fullness of what it is that they're trying to communicate. And this happens in everything, in marketing, in branding. Complete and clear communication is essential, because complete and clear communication is usually concise. How many of you guys have been in some sort of training or maybe a meeting with your boss, and they are talking a lot about where things are going, but you're confused about what it is they're actually trying to say? In my mind, what that shows is there wasn't enough time for them to think about, what is it that I actually want to communicate? How do I do that clearly, completely, and concisely? Right? Those, in my mind, are three of the biggest parts of being a strong communicator: clarity, completion, and conciseness. The last thing that I think people forget is that strong communication is compassionate. I loved that Pam put that in there, because I think that's so important. If you do not understand how your words, how your communication is going to be received by your audience, then you're not a strong communicator. Because strong communicators understand that while the information might be hard or challenging or require people to adapt to a new way, at the end of the day, they're doing it in such a way that it's taking how people are going to receive it into consideration. And then they're couching it, they're crafting their message in a way that it can be heard, even if it's hard. The strongest communicators do that so effectively and so amazingly. When I was younger, I wouldn't have described myself as a compassionate person at all. I was very headstrong, and I was very like, well, this is right, so people need to deal with it. And what that really does is it begins to erode people's ability to trust you, because they don't actually know who they're going to get on any given moment. And so understanding that compassion is a part of communication will actually drastically improve people to be able to receive your message, whatever that message is. So when we think about compassion, I tend to think about empathy and understanding, putting ourselves in the position of the audience who's going to receive it, and understanding how it might impact their job, how it might impact their role. A lot of times leaders come out and they start moving these big strategic plans with no real comprehension of how that's going to impact maybe some of the positions that have to do all the detail work to execute that plan. But strong communicators do that well. They understand that like when we start moving in a particular way, this is going to be a heavy lift for everyone. One of my favorite things about President Brad Mortensen here at Weaver is that he's really mindful of that. He recognizes that any major move of the university requires a heavy lift from everyone on staff. And he always acknowledges that. He just says, I know this is going to be hard work, but we're doing it together. And that makes those strategic plans, those strategic initiatives that he sets into place much easier to receive as he's communicating them, because we know he's thinking about how that will impact our role and our position. And strong communicators do that. One of the things that I think is really important is strong communication requires both the communicator and the recipient to feel satisfied in the conversation, which means that people are leaving feeling heard, validated, seen, recognized. Those are all part of things that are really important when it comes to a strong communication. There was one study done on companies in the United States and the United Kingdom, and they surveyed companies with at least 100,000 employees. And they found that when leaders were clear and complete, concise and compassionate, that they had probably 50% higher total returns to shareholders and the company with great communicators at the helm. But those who didn't have great communicators leading the way lost on average $62.4 million because they were not clear, they were not complete, and they weren't concise in their communication. So these are just things to be aware of. Even if you're going into a meeting, if you're leading the meeting or you're a member of the meeting, be thinking, how do I help the person leading the meeting to be more clear? Ask questions, ask clarifying questions. Be thinking about how do we leave so that we're all on the same page, because we're a part of that just as much as the person leading the meeting is a part of that. Does that all make sense to everyone? Good? Cool. So the next thing I want to talk about then is the things that we don't say. And this is how I affectionately refer to as the do as I say, not as I do conundrum. I don't know about you guys. I heard that from my parents all the time growing up. I am trying really hard not to say that to my kids now, because I recognize that so much of what they do is because of what they see me do. So there's two things that I think help this. If we really want people to think about like doing the things that we say, not as I do, really our behavior has to be alignment then with what we're saying. That's just critical. We can't be good communicators if we're saying one thing and then living something totally different. So if you're a leader at an organization and you're saying, here at our company, we value work-life balance, but you're sending emails to your team members at all hours of the night, your behavior does not line up with what you're saying, which means your team will not believe you, right? That's just one way that we need our behavior to be in alignment. And while I'm sharing, would love for you to drop other things in the chat where you've seen people communicate one thing, but do another and cause confusion among your team. Because I think that's something that happens probably more regularly than we think. Other things that you need to think about as you're thinking about the things that we don't say, are you multitasking when you're talking to people? Is your phone in front of you and is it going off in the middle of one-on-one meetings or in the middle of team meetings? Are you listening? Are you repeating back what you're hearing in the midst of those meetings? Are you communicating to your team members that they're valuable to you? How do you handle yourself with other team members? Think about the office dynamic. So we want to talk about interpersonal dynamics. What's happening in the office around the water cooler? Somebody mentioned that earlier, around the water cooler when it comes to those conversations. Are there some people that are in the know of what's happening in the office and some people who are not? Are there side conversations, maybe secret discussions, things that aren't being expressed to everyone? That creates a culture for your office that sets the stage and the tone for whether or not people feel safe. And that level of safety comes back to communication, their level of communication and what they're going to be willing to do. Healthy teams, healthy office areas have a free flow of information back and forth and up and down, right? So when we think about the things that we don't say, we want to make sure that we ourselves are communicating in a way that our behavior aligns with what it is we're saying, but that also we're acting in accordance to that in our office, and that we're creating an environment where every person feels like they matter, feels like they're a part, feels like they belong, and what they say is valuable. Those are all things that we want to think about. So with some of those things, let's talk about what helps communication go right. With every communicator, with every conversation, it starts with you. Whether you're in a leadership role or not, it starts with you. It starts with your own self-awareness. Okay. Are you walking into the conversation feeling emotional about it? Are you feeling highly charged, or are you anticipating something that could be stressful? That will affect how you communicate, right? So being aware of yourself, being aware of the way that you communicate. Some of us are very direct communicators. We speak very to the point. Some people aren't. And again, neither one is bad or good, but I would say that you have to know how you communicate so that you can make sure that you're communicating to all kinds of people in the group. So just being aware of yourself. I encourage taking assessments, asking for feedback, checking your ego at the door, and be willing to say, okay, I don't know how to do everything perfectly. I want to be someone who's better. So help me understand how I function, how I work. When we talk about what makes communication go right, authenticity and transparency, I think, is huge. Some of the best leaders I've had have been leaders that have been honest and upfront about mistakes that they've made, about areas where they're still learning and growing, and about situations that impact them in really significant ways. And that matters. That sets the stage for what kind of culture you're creating. But if you're pretending, if you are faking it, your team knows people are not stupid and they will also fake it. And so then I would also say, like, alongside of that is the emotional intelligence. It comes back to understanding, I'm going to communicate this, but how is it going to be received? How is it going to impact my team members? And how is it going to impact each one of them differently? Because every one of them is different. So just being aware of yourself, aware of your team, and being able to manage that in the midst of communicating a message is really important. And then I always say clarity in the message. The clearer, the better, always. And your team will follow your lead. So how you set the stage in any meeting is how people will follow. I learned at a young age through one of my favorite leaders, his name was Stan Simmons, that he always started every gathering, every retreat, every team event with a really honest picture of himself. And by doing that, communicating the truth of who he was, we found that we were much more open to communicate the truth of who we are and where we're at, what we're struggling with, what we're feeling good about. And he would just set the stage. So there are things that you can do as a person, like I said, whether you're in leadership or not, that can really make communication go right. The other thing that makes communication go right is valuing each member of your team. First, as an individual person, what are their values? What are their priorities? How do they spend their free time? What is it that matters to them? If you know that about them, you will understand the perspective that they bring to the table, because everyone at your team, in your team, does bring something to the table, and it's your responsibility to figure out what it is. It's your responsibility to be a student of those team members and be really clear on the different things that they bring that contribute to the success, not only of the team, but of the organization, and being able to listen to their perspective. I think one of the best things that anyone can do in any sort of team environment is give space for everyone to share, where their opinion and their voice and their perspective matters. And if you can do that, just that, you will have a very successful team anywhere you go. So if you don't know, I would encourage you to spend a little time thinking about what each member of your team and the team that you work with brings to the table, and be able to give them opportunities for development, because every one of your team members would probably need something different that would help them in their own personal journey, giving them better language to discuss themselves, better language to talk about how they interact with the people around them, and better language for knowing how they do contribute to the organization. Now, if you have a team member that is particularly challenging, I know sometimes thinking about what it is they bring to the table in a positive way can feel near impossible. But it is imperative for you to be able to think about what it is they do bring, because everyone brings something. Even if what they bring is the opposite opinion of you. Maybe what they bring to the table is the devil's advocate. And for some people that can be super frustrating, but in the end, it's going to help people be a lot more clear in what it is that they want to articulate and the goals that they want to accomplish. So if you can figure that out, it makes it a lot easier to work with teams that have a lot of diversity on them and a lot of different personalities coming to the table. Heather, any recommendations for assessments? Yes, we do. Here we do emotional intelligence assessments. We do Myers-Briggs assessments. We do Strengths Finders assessments. We've done trainings on DISC, on color code. Really, most of them, if you can see that they're backed by some sort of research or science. I know for a long time Myers-Briggs wasn't, but there was enough interest that they started taking a lot of that psychological research and filtering Myers-Briggs, so it's gotten a lot better over the years. Those are some ways that I would start just kind of growing, or those are all really good. Yes. So giving people opportunities for the personal development, and then also taking your team through assessments together can be really fun to figure out like how everyone works and how we work together, because it's going to be really interesting when you see that some people like have no problem speaking up. Some people do have a problem speaking up. Some people are comfortable in a team meeting. Some people are not. And sometimes that just comes with learning about them and studying your team. So things to think about when you're thinking about what makes communication go right. The next thing is doing the hard thing. So when we talk about crucial conversations, which I know everyone's talking about, how do we have the hard conversations? If you've read the book, Crucial Conversations, it's really good. If you haven't, I would greatly encourage it. But in Challenging or Crucial Conversations, really what they're saying is that the stakes are usually high, opinions vary, and emotions are strong. So as a leader, as a person initiating that conversation, you get to set the stage for what to expect. And there's a few things I would say in the middle of it. To be successful, you have to allow yourself and the other person to openly and honestly express their opinions. They need to be able to share their feelings, and they need to be able to articulate their experiences. And so sometimes that can be hard, because if you're going into that conversation, you have to allow that person to give you feedback that you might not want to hear. And that's just part of having a really successful conversation. That also means that you have to be in the right frame of mind to have a successful conversation. Don't shove it between two stressful meetings. Pick a time where you can be thoughtful, where you can plan ahead, where you can walk through the points that you want to make prior to that conversation and go from there. That's one of the ways that we do the hard thing when it comes to crucial conversations. George Bernard Shaw, I don't know how many of you know him, he's an Irish playwright, but he wrote, "The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place." So before you can have any crucial conversation, I tell people half the time we haven't laid out our expectations properly of what to expect. So I would go back to that and I would lay out your expectations for the people on your team. What are you expecting of them? Their duties, their conduct, how they handle themselves, how quickly they respond to messages, how quickly they respond to voicemails. What is the standard? And then ask them to repeat back to you what they heard and what they think it means. Because anyone can parrot back what they've heard, but what you need to find out is if they understand or have the same understanding that you do. So what do they think it means? And I don't know about you, but when you're having difficult conversations like this, it helps to have these expectations in place, because then what you do is you go back to the expectation. So once you've got those expectations clear, you repeat them often. I had a leader once that told me vision leaks, right? The mission leaks. The goal of what we're trying to accomplish leaks. And as a leader, as the person who's in charge, it is your responsibility to keep that in front of your people at all times. And it's another form of communication. So when you're doing this, repeat to them often what it is you expect, how you want them to behave, what you want the team dynamic to look like. Because as you do that, it will be much easier for you to have those conversations, because now you can go back to those expectations. But if you come into a crucial conversation and you haven't laid out those expectations, they're going to feel blindsided, right? So having that level of clarity ahead of the time is going to be really important to being able to do those well. Oh, sorry, I had an extra one. And then the next thing is when we go to leading the way. One of the things that I encourage everyone to do when they're in the middle of their responsibilities, their position, their roles, what it is ask yourself, what do you want? What's the goal? What are you trying to accomplish? Beyond the strategies to achieve what the organization is trying to accomplish, what is it that you want out of a team dynamic? What is it that you're hoping to accomplish in a way that is meaningful, in a way that communicates to people that they matter, that what they have to say, what they see, what they're experiencing, ideas that they have, what is it that you want out of that team dynamic? And then write down those characteristics. Spend some time actually thinking through, what are some things I would like to see in our team? Healthy communication, strong interpersonal relationships. That doesn't mean that everyone on your team is best friends, but that does mean that they know how to work with one another. As you're thinking through those things and as you're writing them down, what you want to start thinking then is, what do I need to do to help these things become realities? Part of it, like I said, is probably working on yourself, and part of it is creating opportunities for team growth. So things like trainings, retreats, team events, bringing people in, those are all really effective in creating strong dynamic teams that have strong dynamic communication. And again, it just kind of starts with you leading out and leading the way. Winston Churchill said the difference between mere management and leadership is communication. And one of the things that I want to make sure that people know as we kind of wrap up our time here, and I wanted to leave like 10, 15 minutes for questions if anyone had them, is that communication is first and foremost a skill. It is absolutely a skill. I know it seems sometimes that there are people who are inherently better at it, but what I've learned and what I tend to see is that they were part of a family or a group or an organization that had strong communication, and they communicated in ways that were positive and healthy, and they've learned it. It is a skill, and you can get better. And so 2 things you might want to start doing just even today to start getting better in your own form of communication is ask questions of people around you and actually listen to them. Listen to what they're saying. Listen to what they're not saying. Pay attention to their body language. You can learn a lot about somebody in what's happening with their body. If a situation that they're walking through is hard or exciting or there's potential, you're going to notice that in their body. So pay attention to all of those things. And then just practice communicating. Like I mentioned before, I've been speaking or teaching in public arenas for a really long time. And I always said I was good at BSing. And so when I first started, I would often wing it. I would just get up in front of people and be like, oh, I'm just going to see how it goes. I'm just going to wing it. It was okay. It was never great. It was just okay. But what I was taught to do, actually, back to that leader, Stan Simmons, is he would start sitting down. There was a young group of us that were at this organization at the time, and he would sit down with us weekly, and he would help us craft the message we were trying to communicate. He would actually walk us through different practices, and then we would practice in front of each other. And because we took time practicing, because we actually walked through what it is we were wanting to communicate, we became better communicators. And I tell people this all the time. You want to be a good communicator? Practice what it is that you're communicating. Don't show up to something having not run through it. Because if you have, then they'll know. And not only that, the worst part is afterwards, you're going to think of all the things that you wished you'd said because you just didn't take the time to think through all you want to do. But as you're doing those 2 things, as you're learning to ask questions of people and you're listening to them, and then you're practicing yourself, what you're actually doing is leading the way in a different way of communicating. And when it comes to a team and what you're doing with a team, that begins to build a level of trust that you don't get in any other way. Because people know that when they hear from you, it's going to be clear, it's going to be concise, but they also know that you're listening to them. Trust is a really critical component of communication that is easily overlooked. People usually want a quick fix when it comes to communication. Just tell me the 3 things I need to do to have a really hard conversation so I can be better. But there really isn't a quick fix. If you want to be really good with your team, if you want to be a great leader, then you have to learn how to communicate well. Because if you do that, people will start to trust you when they know that you know where you're going and when they feel seen and heard. right? It goes back to those two things we were talking about, behavior alignment and interpersonal dynamics in the office. So that is what I have for you this morning. I know that Abby and I have talked about, and I think we're gonna do a 3-hour kind of workshop on this next week, where we're gonna actually spend some time giving you space to learn about yourself, take some assessment that we talked about, and actually walk through some of these things. What do you want out of your team? What are some ways that you can see communication going right in your own personal position and what you're trying to accomplish? But what we really want right now, more than anything, is if you have any questions or anything that's kind of hitting you hard, maybe we'd be able to discuss them as a group. You know, I can share my insights, and whatever I don't know, I'm happy to find out and send back out to the group. But that's what I have for you. Abby, I don't know if I should turn it over to you or where we go at this point.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cindy. Does anybody have any questions for Cindy? She did speak briefly about a follow-up that we'll have to this training that will be held in person at the United Way building. We haven't scheduled a date for that, but just watch your emails. We'll definitely do some social media posts so you can be informed on when that's happening. We'd love to welcome you all back to do a deeper dive on what was talked about today. Cindy, do you want to stop sharing your screen and we can open it up to the group to see if anybody has anything they'd like to talk about or questions? If no one has questions, oh wait, here we go. Heather has a question.
11 to 15-year-old girls. Ooh, teenagers are fun. So I, in another life, was a pastor, and I was a high school pastor and worked with high school girls for probably, oh my gosh, 6 or 7 years. And one of the things that I found that they need the most is to feel safe in an environment. If they're going to learn how to use their voice, which is a practice, and there's a lot of women who don't get the opportunity to practice using their voice. One of the things that we want to try and do when we are working with high school girls is to give them space that is safe, where they can voice what they're thinking and what they're considering without any kind of harsh response. Does that make sense, Heather? So like, one of the things we used to do with my group of girls is we used to have like what I called storming sessions, and where everyone could throw whatever idea they wanted on the table. And the one thing we weren't allowed to do was to say why an idea wouldn't work. But instead, as a team, we were trying to figure out, okay, how could we make that work? Because what that did is it validated the idea they were bringing to the table. And oftentimes through the conversation that followed that sort of like idea, they would come to the realization on their own that, oh, maybe that idea won't work the way that I thought it would. But what it actually ends up doing was sort of giving them a level of confidence and knowing that they could figure things out on their own. Does that make sense? Does that help? Cool. Okay, great. You would love some examples of team building, communication activities. Ooh, okay. So there's this really great book called Thinker Toys that just have some fun exercises and activities. But I would definitely like suggest the Thinker Toys. And then in terms of other examples of like team building communication activities, you know what I could probably do is maybe Abby, over the course of the next week, I could just put together like a white page, a 1-page of just different things that we've used here on campus, things that are helpful for building sort of familiarity among the team. We have conversation cards here at my office. They're actually for the workplace conversation cards. So they're not like really intimate, deep personal conversations that are really awkward to answer in a work dynamic. We found those to be really, really helpful. Yeah, one of the things, honestly, when it comes to team building, one of the best things that you can do with your team is to go through a sort of like self-assessment training with them all together, because then everyone's at the table and they're all learning more about their team and how they function and how they interact with people. So I found that to be really helpful. But we do have some activities. So I can put together a page and get it to you, Abby, and maybe you can get it out to everyone. Okay, that sounds great. Oh, I love that. You are a fabulous team leader. Good job. Good job, Elena. Will your deep dive coming up touch on how do you conduct yourself with a professional manner? Professionalism? Yes, it does. So what we'll do is we'll take these 4 kind of areas that we just kind of brushed over this morning, and we will go much deeper into them. And so that comes out in the interpersonal dynamic portion of the training when we talk about what is appropriate at work and what is not appropriate at work. And I work in HR, so I have all the answers. No, I'm just kidding. I don't have all the answers, but we know a lot about how that plays out. So yes, and more interest in team building. Perfect. Yes, we'll make sure. Thank you. We'll make sure to be able to get those to you guys so that they can be helpful, because it is really important. I think one of the things that I talk with when I go and work with departments across campus is that nobody creates enough time for the team to connect with each other, for team members to be professionally developed, or for supervisors to be developed professionally. And they kind of overlook it as like, well, yeah, when we get to that, but they don't get to that. And then they wonder why their team members feel excluded, disconnected, and not a part of what's happening. And then that actually makes them lose interest in wanting to work. So if we recognize that team building and those retreats, those events, those things that you do with your team, they actually really matter. They matter for connection and loyalty and longevity when it comes to retaining employees and retaining team members, and for nonprofits, probably retaining volunteers. And so that's something that will be really important to be able to talk about as well. So any other questions or thoughts? Yeah, you guys are welcome. Communication really, really is important to me. Oh, I love that, Troy. Like doing that at Get Out and Live. Oh, that makes sense. I know Visit Ogden also does that a lot because they have to go test the things around town. So they'll just all go skiing for a day. I wish they would do that here at Weber. But yeah, all I have to say, communication, I think, is really, really critical. And like I said at the very beginning, it really is the key, more than your product, more than the goals that you've lined out in your strategic plan. If you don't know how to communicate well with your colleagues, with your team members, with your employees, with your clients, with your constituents, it just doesn't matter how great the product is. What it all comes back to is how it's being communicated to the team and to the public. Oh, awesome, Troy. The Goal Foundation collaborates with others. So if you guys are looking for something to do, that would be a great team building or mentoring opportunity, is to connect with them and set up something. That'd be awesome.
Heather, I'll make sure you're on the list for the continued education portion of this. So if we don't have any more questions, I would just want to thank you, Cindy, so much for your time and energy. I can tell that you ran through this and that you've done it before. We appreciate so much you sharing your knowledge of crucial conversations and how clear, complete, concise, and compassionate conversations in those high stakes conversations really does make it more meaningful and make it to be less scary. And again, if all of you liked what you heard today, please join us for the second part of that training that we talked about. It'll be coming up in the next month or so. I hear a child talking. Let me see if I can mute that really quick. Katie, I think we're hearing your conversation. Anyway, so I will be sharing out this recording to all of you today, and additionally a survey. So if you can please let us know how we're doing and what we can do to better support your mission, that would mean a lot to me. And if there's nothing else, I'll end there. And thank you all so much for your time.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Cindy.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. It was nice to see you, or your picture, rather.